As a continent, Latin America apparently has a gloomy future with consequences related to the climate change, such as destructive hurricanes, shrinking forests, melted glaciers, and extinct animals. A new World Bank report and a conference of United Nations tried to show what might be the main world problems in 2090. This information was taken from many places in the world where they are having extreme heat and dryness, in order to project what kind of effects could we have on crop yields and even in gross domestic product if temperatures rose and rainfall decreased. In Latin America, many countries are going to lose out with such a change because the consequences might be the decrease from 12% to 50% in farm earnings by the end of the century. Besides, this would increase the rural poverty, and this also involved the current reduction of a number of habitats, which might eventually disappear, speeding up the process of global warming. The most known endangered habitats are Mexico Gulf Coast wetlands, the Andean glaciers, parts of the Amazon, and the Caribbean coral reef. They expel tiny algae when sea temperatures rise, which eventually kills them. Some countries in Latin America are decreasing carbon emissions by the usage of hydroelectricity and biofuels, reducing these emissions 74% lower than India and China. But some Brazilian environmentalists oppose to new hydroelectric dams in the Amazon because they claim the resulting flooding of the forest is generating methane producing rotten vegetation. However, almost half of Latin American emissions are caused by changing in land use. For example, forests and grasslands are turned into farms. Tropical deforestation is now the worst enemy of Latin America because forests can help to reduce the gas emissions, but here they still are used as a way of producing energy. Although we have to mention Costa Rica because almost 96% of this energy comes from renewable sources, and it has policies that were created to increase forestation in 10% in the last decade, and they were achieved. European Union. One of the aims of European Union is to fight against the climate change and its effects. The programs and initiatives related to climate change have been implemented since the early 90s, and the Commission also is in charge of supervising that every policy implemented must be put into practice. In order to reduce the CO2 emissions, the European Commission and some industries, environmental organizations, and some stakeholders established the European Climate Change Programme, or ECCP, in 2000, and the main environmental policies are in European Union's Emissions Trading Scheme, or ETS. One of them sets how much CO2 power plants, industries, and energy-intensive factories can emit each year. These projects allows to the enterprise which are exceeded from the standards to buy the right of an amount of emissions from other companies who do not use all their emissions totals, and if they do not cover the excess, they are fined. Other ECCP measures include the improvement of fuel efficiency of cars and the efficient energy system in buildings by the usage of renewable energy sources, as wind, sun, tidal power, biomass, that is to say plant materials or animal waste, and geothermal power, heat from hot springs or volcanoes. And another part of the ECCP is related to reduce emissions from aviation and road transport. With all these measures, European Union is seeking to bring under control climate change before it is too late. So the new policies must be strong enough to match the severity of climate change and must reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases before 2020. European Union is now focused on developing new efficient and clean power by using a low-carbon energy system. However, the implementation of these energy plants or stations is going to be only in developing countries. Some of the long-term targets are to reduce greenhouse gases emissions such as CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, etc., to increase the share of renewable energy in energy consumption to 20% across the European Union. If all the country agrees to achieve these goals, the European Union emissions reduction target will be increased to 30%. A common object for all member states to reach 10% of biofuels in transportation in the European Union by 2020, with a set of clear rules to ensure this is done in a sustainable way. There are also individual targets for each member state to reduce emissions from buildings, transport, agriculture, and waste by an average of 10% below 2005 levels by 2020. As we can see about Latin America, we just find information about what might be the main consequences of the climate change, but not fixed regulation as the European nations. Almost every country has regulations or some entity is in charge of this topic. For example, here in Chile we have the Environmental Ministry, o Ministerio del Medio Ambiente, and there is no campaign against national emissions of greenhouse gases or commercials to increase the social awareness about climate change. The problem is that, as a continent, we are not united in order to prevent any kind of factor that can cause us the worst effects that we can imagine, and not only in population, but also in the environment. Meanwhile, the European Union has a full control about their industries, and these are fine if they do not respect the regulations about CO2 emissions. And in parallel, here in Latin America, European industries come to create profitable businesses without a proper inquiry. For example, Endesa, a Spanish company, has almost 50% of the Hydrosense share, the controversial project.